Hello there, welcome to HFY Quantum Pro. Here, helping one another makes the universe smarter. So, what we are waiting for? Let's begin our story.
The drone footage played for the fourth time, and nobody in the briefing room spoke that on the screen, the jungle of Adreth 9 was green and wet and very still. Then the Vrethkai came out of the trees. It was enormous, low to the ground but wide, 6 limbs moving in a smooth and terrible rhythm, its armored back catching the pale light of the planet's twin suns. The survey drone tried to adjust its flight path. It did not matter. The creature moved faster than anything that size had any right to move. In 4 seconds, the drone was in pieces. Then the footage looped again. Captain Sorva pressed 2 of her long fingers against her temple and closed her eyes. She was Orvani, tall and thin, with bioluminescent frills along her neck that were, right now, a deep and unhappy blue. That, she said, is the third drone we have lost to this animal. Fourth, said Livet, from the far end of the table. He was also Orvani, the ship's chief science officer, and he had the particular expression of a person who understood the facts perfectly and found all of them unfortunate. The first was recorded by a ground camera. It is in the archive under the file name Do Not Open at Mealtime. Grin, the ship's engineer, made a low sound in his wide chest. He was Durith, stocky, four-armed, and wearing the permanent expression of someone who had been asked to do something unreasonable and was still annoyed about it. The survey corridor runs directly through that creature's territory, he said. The GCA wants us to map it. We cannot map it if the creature destroys every piece of equipment we send in. The answer is obvious. Reroute. Sorva nodded slowly. A reroute would add 14 months to the mission. 14 months, said Grin, is better than a funeral. Rail had been sitting at the back of the room and had not said a single word for the entire briefing. He was the only human on the ship. He was not tall by human standards, and he was not particularly large. He had dark hair cut short and a calm face and the kind of quiet that some people mistake for disinterest. He had a mug of something warm in his hands, and he had been watching the drone footage with the focused attention of a person working through a problem. He set the mug down. Does anyone have a topographic map of the area around the nest? Everyone looked at him. The Sorva's frills shifted from blue to a cautious gray. I am sorry. A topographic map, Rail said again. Elevation, water sources, terrain shape. Anything that shows what the ground looks like around where that animal is living. Lever blinked. He had 4 eyelids, so this took a moment. We have survey scans. I can pull them. But may I ask what you're looking for? Not sure yet, Rail said. I want to look at the footage again tonight, and then look at the maps. Can you send them to my cabin? Livet looked at Sorva. Sorva looked at Rail. You are a civilian habitat consultant, she said, in the tone of someone reminding themselves of this fact. You were brought aboard to advise on safe survey practices around wildlife. Yes, said Rail. And the wildlife in question has destroyed 4 drones and sent 3 of my scouts to the medical bay. Yes. And your response to this information is to ask for maps. And to watch the footage again, he agreed. I want to see how it moves. Grin said something in Durith that the translation system rendered as a phrase, meaning roughly your concern is noted and ignored. Rail did not appear to take offense. The briefing ended with no resolution. Sorva announced she would file a preliminary delay report with GCA command and make a final decision by morning. The crew filtered out. Livet sent the terrain scans to Rail's cabin as requested, then stood in the corridor for a moment, trying to decide how he felt about a human who watched predator footage for fun. He decided he felt uncertain in his cabin that night. Rail watched the drone footage 17 times. Not the dramatic part, not the charge, not the destruction. He watched the 30 seconds before the charge. The way the creature stood at the edge of the trees. The way its head moved, the angle of its body, the position of its limbs. He watched the footage from his second drone and the third, looking for the same moments. Then he looked at the maps. The nest was situated at the base of a shallow ridge, pressed against a natural rock wall on 3 sides. The terrain funneled movement toward it from only one direction. Every drone had come in from the east, straight down the open approach. Every scout team had done the same. Rail sat back and looked at the ceiling for a while. Then he pulled up the thermal scan data Livet had included in the file. He almost missed it. The signatures were small and clustered tight against the main heat source. 3 of them, maybe 4, each one much smaller than the central mass. He looked at them for a long time. In the morning, he went to find Captain Sorva before she filed her report. She was in her office, already working. She looked up when he entered, and her frills shifted to a guarded orange. "I'd like to walk to the nest tomorrow morning," Rail said. Sorva stared at him the way a person stares at something that has said something so unexpected that the brain needs a moment to process whether it was real. "Walk," she said. "Yes." "To the nest." "Yes." Her frills turned a deep, alarmed red. "Of the creature that has destroyed 4 drones. I want to go in the early morning," Rail said. "Before the heat of the day. And I want to go alone." Sorva opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Get some sleep," Rail said gently. "I'll explain everything at first light." He left before she could find the words to stop him. Sorva called the emergency crew meeting at the first hour of ship morning, before the lights had finished cycling to full brightness. She did not call it because she had made a decision. She called it because she needed to hear other people confirm that what the human had said was as unreasonable as it sounded. Everyone agreed it was unreasonable. This did not make her feel better. "Let him go," said Grin, from his seat at the side of the room. His 4 arms were folded across his chest in a way that meant he had already decided and was not interested in discussion. "He is a civilian. He was hired to advise. He has given advice. Nobody is required to take it. He has not given advice," Livet said carefully. "He has asked for maps and said he wants to walk into an active predator zone. That is not advice. That is a plan to die." "Then let him die," said Grin. "It is his choice." "It is not his choice," said Sorva, and the frills around her neck went bright gold, which was the Orvani color for stop talking and listen. "He is aboard my ship. His safety is my responsibility. I cannot simply allow a crew member, civilian or otherwise, to walk into a kill zone and wave." Grin made the Durith sound that meant your concern is noted and ignored, which was apparently a common phrase for him. Yua had said nothing yet. She was the smallest person in the room by a wide margin, celery built, 6-limbed, barely knee height to most of the crew, but she had a stillness about her that made the room feel like it was arranged around her. She was the ship's xenobiology specialist, and she had been sitting with a reader in her upper 2 hands since the meeting started, working through something while the others talked. "I would like to know," she said without looking up, "what exactly he found in the thermal scans." Everyone looked at her. "He asked for the terrain maps last night," she continued. Livet sent him the full survey file. The full file includes the thermal data from the last aerial pass. Now she looked up. Her eyes were the pale gold of old paper. "I've been looking at the same data since I woke up this morning. I want to know if he saw what I see." Sorva said, "What do you see?" Yua set the reader down on the table and turned it so they could all look. On the screen was the thermal scan of the nest zone. A large orange mass at the center, which was the Vrethkai, and 3 tight clusters of smaller heat signatures pressed against it. "Those," said Yua, "are juveniles." The room was quiet. "The Vrethkai is nursing," she continued. "The behavior documented in all 4 drone incidents is consistent with a defensive nest response, not territorial aggression. The animal is not attacking because it owns the land. It is attacking because it believes its young are in danger." She paused. "There is a significant difference." Livet was already pulling up the drone footage on the main screen. He moved to the moment before the first charge. He had never looked at it this way before, looking not at what the creature did, but at what it was doing before it chose to do it. Its head was turned slightly inward, toward the trees, toward the nest. It looked back before it charged, he said quietly. "Yes," said Yua. "It was checking on them." "Yes." Grin unfolded his arms. He did not say anything, but the expression on his wide face had shifted from dismissal to something more complicated. Sorva sat down. She looked at the thermal image for a long moment. "This changes the situation. It changes the explanation," Yua agreed. "It does not change the danger. The creature is still Apex class. It is still faster than any of us. It is still capable of destroying a survey drone in 4 seconds. The fact that its motivation is protective does not make the teeth smaller. She paused again. But it does make the behavior more readable. Predictable. A creature acting from fear for its young follows different patterns than a creature acting from pure territorial instinct. Patterns a person could learn, said Livet. Patterns a person who has done this kind of work before might already know, said Yua. There was another silence. It was a different quality of silence than the one before. Less afraid, more thoughtful. Sorva said, "Where is the human right now?" Livet checked. Outside. He is sitting on the embankment near the south landing strut. A pause. He appears to be watching the tree line. Gren stood up and walked to the viewport. He looked out for a moment. The figure of Rael was small and still in the early light, sitting with his arms resting on his knees, looking outward toward the distant green edge of the jungle. He already knows, Gren said. It was not a question. Yes, said Sorva. I believe he does. She stood up and straightened her uniform and looked around the room. I'm going to go and speak with him. Livet, I want a full behavioral analysis on the Vrethkai footage by mid-morning. I want your findings on the juvenile thermal signatures written up formally. Gren, I know, said Gren. Stay here and do not shoot anything. I was going to say stay here and run the engine diagnostics, said Sorva. But yes, also that. She walked out into the early light and found Rael exactly where the sensors had placed him, sitting quietly on the gravel embankment with his eyes on the trees. She sat down beside him. He did not seem surprised. You found the juveniles and the thermal data, she said. Last night, he said. And you still want to walk out there? More than before, actually. He looked at her. A mother protecting young is one of the most predictable creatures in the natural world. If you understand what she is afraid of. Sorva watched the tree line. Somewhere out there, in the wet green dark, the creature was doing the same thing Rael was doing right now. Watching. Waiting. Different planet, she said. Different planet, he agreed. Same mother. Nobody slept well that night. Not the crew, and almost certainly not the captain. At some point after midnight, Livet got up and went back to the science bay and watched drone footage for 3 hours. He was not sure what he was looking for. He watched anyway.at dawn. Rael was already packed. He stood at the base of the south ramp with a small carry bag and a container of field rations. He was wearing the same clothes he always wore, sturdy, practical, nothing that would catch on branches. He had no weapon, not a sidearm, not a blade, not even a distress flare. Sorva stood at the top of the ramp and looked down at him. Her frills were a flat, pale gray, which was the color Ivani went when they had made peace with something they did not like. You are unarmed, she said. Yes. The creature weighs approximately 4,000 kilograms and has venom in both jaw sets. I know, and you're bringing food. Rael looked down at the container in his hand. Local fauna protein mixed from the supply stores. Yua helped me find something that would register as organic to the creature's senses without triggering a predator recognition response. Behind Sorva, Livet appeared in the doorway. Then Yua, then Gren, who had his arms folded and the look of a person attending an event they disapprove of but cannot stop. 200 meters, Rael said to Sorva. I will not go closer than that. I will sit down. I will be visible the whole time. If it charges, I will not run. He let that settle. Running triggers pursuit. I will hold still. If it makes contact, Grin said flatly, you will be dead. If it makes contact, Rael said with the same calm voice, it will have made a decision. And decisions can be learned from too. He looked at Grin for a moment. I've done this before. Not with this animal, but with things just as big and just as fast. The approach is the same. Grin looked like he had a great deal more to say. He did not say it. Sorva stepped aside from the ramp. Rael walked down it and onto the ground of a Dreth, 9, that the jungle was about 400 meters from the ship's landing zone. Between them was open ground, low grass, damp from the night, bioluminescent moss still faintly glowing in the gray early light. Rael walked slowly, not the slow walk of someone who is afraid, the slow walk of someone who is thinking, measuring, paying attention to everything at once. Behind him, on the ship, for crew members pressed themselves against the viewport glass. Grin had, entirely without deciding to, put his hand on the emergency equipment locker. He had not opened it, but his hand was there, Rail reached the edge of the open ground. The trees began about 40 meters ahead of him. The nest was another 160 meters beyond that, inside the tree line. He could not see it. He sat down in the grass, cross-legged, and placed the food container to his left. Then he was still that he did not do anything else. He did not signal. He did not call out. He simply sat there, visible and unhidden, in the open, and waited. 10 minutes passed out on the ship. Nobody spoke. At T12 minutes, the tree line moved. The Vrethkai came out slowly. Not the burst of speed from the drone footage. This was careful. It came to the edge of the trees and stopped. Its head was low and its 6 legs were planted wide. Even at this distance, the size of it was astonishing. It was longer than 2 of the ship's ground vehicles placed end to end. Its armored back caught the early light in dull bronze plates. The 2 sets of jaw plates were closed. IT looked at Rail. Rail did not move. Grin's hand tightened on the locker handle. Livet grabbed Grin's arm with 2 of his own. The creature took 1 step forward, then another. It was moving diagonally, not directly toward Rail, but in a wide arc that would bring it around his left side. Rail tracked it without turning his head, using his peripheral vision. He knew this movement. He had seen it on Earth in different shapes and sizes for most of his working life. It was evaluation. It was, I see you. I am deciding what you are. He kept still. The creature completed the arc and stopped about 30 meters away. It stood broadside to him, presenting its full size, its full mass. It was an unmistakable message in the language of large animals everywhere. Look at what I am. Consider what I am capable of. Rail looked. He did not lean back. He did not lean forward. He tilted his head down slightly, not looking away, but reducing direct eye contact to something less like challenge. Then he reached slowly to his left, picked up the food container, and placed it on the ground between himself and the creature. He slid himself backward about 2 meters and went still again. The Vrethkai watched out a long minute past. IT moved toward the container. Low and slow, it stopped a meter away from it, and its head descended, and it investigated the smell for a long, careful moment. Then it looked up at Rail. Rail looked at the ground just beside it. Not at it. Beside it, another minute. The creature turned and walked back toward the trees. It did not hurry. At the edge of the tree line, it stopped once, looked back, and then was gone. Rail sat in the grass for 2 more minutes. Then he stood up, picked up his empty bag, and walked back to the ship. Grin was at the bottom of the ramp. His arms were not folded. He was standing like someone who had just watched something he did not have a category for. It could have killed you in 3 seconds, he said. Rail looked at him pleasantly. Yes, but it didn't. He walked up the ramp and sat down at the crew table and opened his breakfast. Nobody said anything for a while. Then Livet sat down across from him with his recorder and 17 questions and the expression of a scientist who has just been handed the best day of his career. Rail answered every one of them between bites. The debrief was the loudest conversation the Pale Margin had hosted in its 11 years of service. Sorva did not shout. Sorva had never shouted in her life, but she spoke with a precision and a control that was, in some ways, worse than shouting. Her frills had cycled through 4 colors in the first 2 minutes: blue for distress, orange for caution, a brief red for alarm, and now back to a tightly controlled gray that meant she was working very hard at being professional. You went into an unsecured wildlife zone, unarmed, without crew backup, without a distress beacon active, and sat on the ground in front of an Apex-class predator, she said. Yes, said Rail. And your assessment of this decision is that it was acceptable. My assessment is that it worked. Those are not the same thing. No, he agreed. But in this case, they both happened to be true. Grin was leaning against the far wall. He was not contributing to the argument. He was doing something he did not often do, which was thinking. He had been replaying the footage from the viewport cameras in his head since breakfast and could not stop. Livet, on the other hand, had notes. He had 11 pages of notes already and kept adding to them. He had not been officially asked to take notes. He was taking them anyway. Yua sat at the table with her upper hands folded and her lower 4 resting in her lap. She had been waiting for Sorva to finish the professional portion of the conversation so the useful portion could begin. Sorva sat down. She looked at Rail for a long moment. Explain it to me, she said. Not the justification. The method. How do you know what to do? Rail was quiet for a moment, arranging his thoughts. I grew up in Australia, he said. It is a region on Earth. Most things that live, they're capable of killing a human if they choose to. Some of the most dangerous animals on the planet are small enough to fit in your hand. He paused. I started working with wildlife when I was young. First small animals, then larger ones. I spent years tracking saltwater crocodiles across river systems, working alongside monitor lizards big enough to knock a grown person off their feet. And I learned, slowly, that every one of them was readable if you paid attention. Grin said, very quietly for someone of his size, readable how? They all have a language, Rail said. It's not words. It's position, timing, movement. Where they put their weight. Whether they check behind them before they act. The arc of their approach. A charging animal and an evaluating animal look different. Most people only know the charging version because that is the one that gets documented. Livett looked up from his notes. The footage. Before every charge. The creature looked toward the nest. Yes, it was always reactive, not aggressive. It charged because it believed a threat was closing on the young. Every drone came in from the same direction, at the same height, making the same electromagnetic noise. As far as that animal knew, it was the same threat coming back each time. Sorva's frills had gone a pale, steady blue. Not distress anymore. Something closer to focus. And when you sat down, I broke the pattern. I was visible, not hidden. I was low, not above. I was still, not approaching. And I did not come from the east. He leaned forward slightly. She came out to evaluate me, not to kill me. When she did the lateral arc, moving to my side instead of straight at me. That is investigative behavior. She wanted to see what I was, what I smelled like, whether I was a threat or something unknown. And the food, a neutral gesture, not a bribe. She doesn't know what a bribe is. But an offering sits differently in animal language than an approach does. I put it down, I moved away from it. That says, I brought something. I'm not taking something. That is a very different signal. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Yua said, you can do this again. Get the survey team through the corridor. Yes, with us present. With specific rules, Rail said. I'll write them out. Movement patterns. Sound discipline. No sudden light changes. No rapid directional shifts. No one breaks from the group. No one raises their arms above their head. He looked at Grin. And no weapons. Nothing that reads as a threat. Grin's jaw moved. If something goes wrong, Rail said, a weapon won't save you from an animal that size at close range. What will save you is not giving a reason to charge. Another silence. Grin looked at the floor, then at the wall, then at Sorva. Sorva said, Grin, you will remain on the ship during the survey transit. Grin opened his mouth. Not because I do not trust your judgment, Sorva said, because I trust your instincts. And your instincts, in a moment of crisis, will tell you to raise a weapon. I cannot have that. Grin closed his mouth. His forearms arranged themselves across his chest in a complicated posture that probably had a name in Durith and probably meant something impolite. He did not argue. That evening, Rail went back to the field alone. He sat in the same spot as before, at dusk this time, the light going gold and long through the grass. He waited quietly. The Vrethkai came out faster this time, still careful, still watching, but without the long pause at the tree line. She completed her arc and stopped at roughly the same distance. And this time, at the edge of the trees behind her, a small shape appeared, low to the ground. One of the juveniles. Its armor plates were still soft-looking, the way young things look before the world finishes hardening them. It watched Rail with the absolute, fearless curiosity that only the very young possess. Rail did not move, but very quietly, he smiled. Survey day. The team assembled at the base of the south ramp at 0558. For people, Rail, Sorva, Livett, and Yua. Grin stood at the top of the ramp with his arms folded. He had been standing there since 0530. He did not say goodbye. He watched them with the expression of someone who had been told to stay home and hated every part of it. Rail did a final check of his team. Nobody was carrying a weapon. Nobody had brought anything that flashed, beeped on a short cycle, or emitted high-frequency sound. They all wore muted, earth-tone clothing as he had requested. Nothing reflective, nothing bright. Sorva had brushed something in her frills to dull their natural glow. That had been Yua's suggestion. Rael had been grateful. "We move slowly," he said, for the fourth time, because there is no such thing as too many times when the alternative is being killed. "We stay together. If I stop, you stop. If I crouch, you crouch." Nobody lifts their arms above shoulder height. Nobody runs. If you feel the urge to run, do not. Look at the ground instead. Breathe. He looked at each of them. "We are not a threat. We are not prey. We are something she has seen before and not found dangerous. We're going to behave exactly like that thing she already decided was not worth charging." He turned and walked into the open ground. They followed. The morning was gray and wet, the twin suns not yet fully above the horizon. The bioluminescent moss had gone dark with the coming of daylight, but the air still had a faint pale glow to it, the way the air on a Dreth 9 always did in the early hours. The jungle ahead was quiet. They crossed the open ground in 8 minutes. Rael kept his pace even. Behind him, he could hear the soft steps of the others, and, under that, the small sounds of a jungle morning. Things calling, things moving through branches, the drip of dew from heavy leaves. They entered the tree line. The temperature dropped by several degrees immediately. The canopy here was thick and very old, and the trunks were wide enough that all 4 of them together could not wrap their arms around the largest ones. The survey corridor ran roughly northeast, and Rael led them along it, watching the undergrowth on both sides. Livet was recording everything. He had a small device in his lower hand that captured audio and light data continuously. He was trying to be quiet about it. He was managing about 70%. At 88 minutes into the corridor, Rael stopped. Everyone stopped out on the left side of the corridor, about 40 meters into the trees. Something was watching them. It was the Vrethkai, not moving, not low in the threat posture from the drone footage, just standing between 2 large trunks, following them with her eyes. Her coloring blended with the bark and shadow almost perfectly. If Rael had not been looking for the specific stillness of a large animal choosing not to move, he might have missed her entirely. He crouched slowly. The others crouched. They waited. The Vrethkai watched. 30 seconds. A full minute. Then she turned and moved deeper into the trees, parallel to the corridor, and disappeared. Yua exhaled. Livet wrote 3 rapid lines of notes. Sorva crouched beside Rael with her frills firmly pressed flat to suppress their glow, said nothing. But she watched the place where the creature had stood with the expression of someone who has just understood something for the first time. They moved on to T22 minutes. Yua spotted movement in the undergrowth on the right side. Low, small, quick, here and gone. Then again, a few meters further on. And again, she touched Rael's arm and pointed that he looked. He had already seen it. He kept walking at the same pace and said, very quietly, "Juveniles. Parallel movement. Curiosity behavior. Do not look directly at them. Do not stop." Sorva's hand went to her side out of habit. The habit of having a sidearm there on every difficult mission for 20 years. Her hand found nothing. She breathed. The juveniles followed them for another 6 minutes. Small shapes in the undergrowth, almost impossible to see unless you knew exactly how to look. 3 of them, possibly 4, keeping pace, watching, then they were gone. The survey corridor took 39 minutes to transit. Livet collected all required mapping data. The mineral density readings were complete. Sorva's secondary ecological survey was logged. Every piece of data that had required 4 failed drone missions and a 3 scout medical incident was now in the ship's system. They were almost at the far end of the corridor, the jungle beginning to thin into the secondary survey field, when Rael stopped again. The Vrethkai was in the path. Not at the side. In the path, directly ahead, standing at the corridor's exit, looking at them. Nobody moved. Rael did not crouch this time. He stood and looked at a point slightly to the left of her, taking in her full posture in his peripheral vision. Weight even across all 6 limbs. Head level, not low in the threat posture, not high in the alert posture. Just looking, she made a sound. It was not in the GCA database. It was low and slow and resonant, the kind of sound that a person feels in their chest before they hear it with their ears. Rail let 3 seconds pass. Then he made a sound back. Not the same sound, he did not have the chest cavity for that, but something in the same register, the same rhythm. The sound a person makes without words when they want to say, I hear you. I'm not afraid of you. I am not a danger to you. The Vrethkai held for a moment. Then she stepped off the path and into the trees and was gone. They walked out of the corridor into the open secondary field without another word. Sorva stopped at the edge of the trees. She stood there for a moment looking back. Her frills a color Rail had not seen before, a soft, deep gold, different from the alarmed gold of the briefing room. He did not know the meaning of this color, but it looked, he thought, a little like wonder. They made the return transit along the northern approach without seeing the Vrethkai again. They reached the ship. Grin was still at the top of the ramp. He looked at them all. He counted them. His arms unfolded. Nobody died, he said, as if this required confirmation. Nobody died, said Sorva. She walked up the ramp and went directly to the bridge and filed the survey data with GCA command. All fields complete. Mission segment resolved. No casualties. Note damage. In the notes section, she typed 3 words before she could talk herself out of it. Send more humans. Then she deleted it. Then she typed it again. She left it in. GCA command responded to the mission report in 3 hours and 12 minutes, which was fast by GCA standards and suggested that someone important had been watching the situation closely. The response had 3 questions and 1 commendation. The commendation was for the survey completion. The questions were, in order, how was the exclusion zone resolved? What methodology was employed? And could this methodology be replicated? Sorva wrote her answers carefully and filed them before breakfast. Then she went to the crew table and sat down and ate without tasting any of it because she was thinking. The ship spent 2 more days on a Dreth, 9 completing secondary survey work in other zones. Life returned to its normal rhythms. Grin fixed a calibration issue in the port engine. Livet began writing what he was calling a preliminary behavioral analysis, and which was already 30 pages long and, according to Yua, probably needed to be shortened. Yua was building a full database entry for the Vrethkai that was more complete than anything the GCA had on file. Rail did fieldwork. During the first day, he completed 3 hours of secondary soil and botanical sampling in the non-restricted zones. During the second day, he went back to the corridor approach at dawn, sat in a spot in the grass, and was quiet for a while. The Vrethkai came out once, looked at him, and went back into the trees. He counted that as a conversation that on the final evening before departure, Grin found Rail in the engine bay. Rail had wandered in to look at something mechanical and had stayed because the engine bay was warm and smelled like hot metal, and that was, against all logic, comforting. Grin was running a routine diagnostic. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Grin said, without looking up from the panel, "Were you afraid?" Rail did not answer immediately. He sat on a crate near the wall and thought about it properly. Every second, he said. Grin looked up. From the moment I walked down the ramp the first time, Rail said, I was afraid. The whole time I was sitting in the grass. When she came out and started the arc, my heart was going very fast. He paused. I was afraid in the corridor when she was parallel to us in the trees. I was afraid when she came out onto the path at the exit. Grin stared at him. Then why did you do it? Because fear is useful, Rail said. It sharpens you, makes you precise. The problem is not fear. The problem is panic. Panic makes you run, or freeze, or do something loud and sudden that turns a watching animal into a charging one. He looked at his hands. I have been afraid many times. I have never panicked. I have worked very hard for a long time to make sure those two things stay separate. Grin looked at him for a moment. Then he looked back at his panel. He did not say anything else, but something in his posture had changed. The permanent low-grade tension of a person who has been skeptical for too long and is slowly and privately letting it go. The next morning, Sorva called Rail into her office. She had been the captain of a GCA survey vessel for 20 years. She had worked in contested zones in post-conflict ecological recovery sites, in places where the fauna alone could strip a ship's hull on a bad day. She had a wall of commendations and a small collection of scars she did not talk about. She sat across from Rail with her hands flat on the desk and her frills resting in a still, neutral position. "I want to understand it," she said. "Not the technique. I have you as report and live its analysis for that. I want to understand how a species learns this." Rail thought about it. "We grew up on a very difficult world," he said. "For a very long time. The large animals that shared our planet were faster than us, stronger than us, better built for almost every environment. We survived alongside them not because we were the most powerful thing in the space, but because we were patient. We watched. We learned the patterns." He paused. "We made a lot of mistakes. A lot of people died from those mistakes. But we remembered, and we passed on what we learned. For tens of thousands of years before we had any technology worth mentioning, we survived by understanding the things that could kill us, not by destroying them, but by reading them." Sorva was quiet for a moment. "And if you had been wrong," she said, "out there in the grass, if she had charged," Rail looked at her levelly, "then I would have been wrong." He said it simply, not bravely, not performing courage for an audience. Just as a fact, the way a person states the weather or the time. Sorva held his gaze for a long moment. Then she looked away, out the viewport, at the green mass of Adreth 9's canopy far below. "I will recommend you for all future high-risk fauna survey assignments," she said. "I appreciate that. I'm also going to recommend that GCA review its exclusion zone protocols. The current criteria do not distinguish between territorial aggression and defensive nesting behavior. This creates unnecessary mission delays, and," she paused, "it means the animal gets blamed for doing exactly what any parent would do." Rael looked at her. Something in his expression shifted, quiet and real. "Thank you," he said. When the pale margin lifted off from Adreth, 9 an hour later, Livet was at the Science Bay viewport watching the receding green. He almost missed it. He nearly looked away to check his recording device, and then some instinct held him at the glass, to the edge of the survey corridor, standing in the open ground where Rail had sat in the grass. The Vrethkai was watching the ship rise. The 3 juveniles were beside her, all 4 of them still as the trees. Livet said nothing for a moment. Then he said quietly, "Gren, come look at this." Gren came to the viewport. He stood there and looked down at the receding shapes on the ground. They were very small already, the ship climbing fast, but he could still see them. "She came to watch us leave," he said. Rail, behind them both, looked at the viewport. He thought about it, or to make sure we did, he said that a beat of silence. Then Gren made a sound that, in Durith, meant something between a laugh and a nod of deep respect. It was a sound he used rarely. He used it then. The planet fell away beneath them. The survey was complete. The 14-month delay had become 4 days. The creature and her young were safe. The corridor was mapped, and somewhere in the GCA's mission archive, in a notes field that would eventually be read by 7 different people in 3 different departments, were 3 words filed by a captain with 20 years of experience: "Send more humans." She had meant it as a professional recommendation. Every person who read it understood it was also something else, a quiet acknowledgement of a species that had walked onto a strange world, sat down in the grass, and simply chosen to pay attention. In the long record of the GCA's first contact surveys, there were many stories of humanity's strength, its technology, its endurance. This one was about none of those things. This one was about a person who sat very still and waited, and was right.